okay, Bitcoin goes to 1 million. All the people who stack Bitcoin are fine because they're rich. What about the people who didn't stack Bitcoin? I've been in Bitcoin for 12 years now. The transformation is very radical. But the truth is, the final chapter on the MicroStrategy or the strategy story is Michael Saylor. He's opened up a world for a lot of people, and he has accelerated the adoption. But there's also reasons to be concerned. Bitcoin's at $1 million. This is what life looks like.
Mr. Tomer Strolight, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Happy to be here.
Tomer, for those people who don't know, is a wonderful philosopher, just written many books, articles, children's books. Why Bitcoin is one of the more probably famous ones that people might know in Bitcoin trading cards in the first series, actually. So Tomer's been all over the place. You probably read his work at some point or seen it somewhere. We're going to talk about the journey that Tomer's going on. We're going to tap into some current events here first quickly, but we're going to talk about some of the wisdom Tomer's gained just from his Bitcoin journey in a little bit. And then we're going to talk about where that world is headed here. We're going to talk about Bitcoin at $1 million. What does life look like? What's happening in that world? Is fiat here? Is it not? What's happening to human beings? It's kind of that journey that Tomer, as he said offline, has been writing about and talking about and thinking about for a long time. So in saying that, what are your thoughts on some of the current events that are happening today? Jack Mallers announcing his company, partnering with Cantor and Fitzgerald and Tether. We have Bitcoin or Saylor buying Bitcoin like crazy right now, up above 550,000 Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on just kind of the market dynamics, tariffs? There's wreaking havoc. There's stuff going on. You're in Canada, so there's all kinds of Canadian American things. I mean, There's just stuff all over the place. What's your take on what's happening right now?
Well, the world is in chaos, and I hate to sound so typical, but the world is in chaos because we've been on a fiat standard for very long and expecting to be able to print free lunches when there's no such thing as a free lunch. And we're getting to the end. We're maxing out the credit card. We're getting to the end of the game, and people are trying to change the rules of the game as much as they can to kick the can down the road again. It was very hard to make short-term predictions about what exactly will break or if it will break. I mean, when COVID lockdowns started, there were lots of people anticipating and predicting the end of the world. The supply chains will dry up, we'll all starve to death, and we won't be able to wipe our asses because there won't be any toilet paper. And none of that really happened. So the market, the market found its way around a lot of these obstacles, but it certainly changed our way of life. And now you and I meet not in person, but we meet over the internet, and so much of that happened. I live in the Greater Toronto area, and I was just introduced to someone this morning who also works in Toronto, and we still did a Zoom call because it would have taken me 2 hours to commute to meet him where he is, and it's not worth it. So there's a lot of value in face-to-face contact, but we've supplemented a lot of it. And not to go too far off on a tangent from what you asked, Bitcoin is showing itself in this new world, right? It's done so well through every crisis that's happened. It was born into an economic crisis, the 2008 financial crisis. It survived the COVID crisis and in fact flourished throughout it. And now we're in another kind of crisis, and different people will label it differently based off of who they blame for the crisis. But the crisis was coming, it was coming as a smart person would have seen it coming in 1971 and just accumulating and snowballing and snowballing. And so Bitcoin is doing very well during this crisis. It's demonstrating that it's uncompromising and uncontrollable and immalleable, and that its promises will be kept even when we have politicians who can't even decide what they're promising from one minute to the next. So it's a steady pole in the ground, right? It's a steady anchor that we can really live by. And there are people who are taking big leaps into betting on it, or betting may not be the right word, but allocating capital to it, right? And putting using it as their marker for seeing the future. And what's happening with MicroStrategy, which is now being emulated by lots of companies, but on a big scale. We see this 21 Capital announcement, which is really interesting. And there's lots of talk about issuing all kinds of debt supported by or backed by Bitcoin. So there's instead of dismissing it and seeing it as very alien, I think what we're seeing is Washington, D.C. and Wall Street taking a really good hard look at this. And that doesn't mean that they're going to get it right the first time around. And it doesn't mean that what is working now will necessarily work into the future once it transitions, because the transformation from a debt-based, government-issued money system to a work-based, private, global money system is very radical. And it'll probably go through phases. And just as the internet went through phases where it really looked like people who sold networking equipment were going to be very powerful, or internet service providers would be very powerful, or portals. Do you remember the word portals? Or are you too young to even remember? Like, portals were the business model, AOL and Yahoo and MSN, and like nobody visits any of those websites anymore. And so as a thing matures and works its way through civilization, different aspects of it become the profitable ones. But you have to have the pioneering activities that lay the groundwork for each next stage. And I think we're kind of at that stage, which you might call the end of the plebs only stage, or the birth of the institutional stage. But we're still only at the very birth of the institutional stage. Like, the overwhelming majority of institutions have zero exposure to Bitcoin that they know of. Some may hold some MicroStrategy shares because of index investments, but they don't understand Bitcoin. And owning MicroStrategy doesn't mean you understand Bitcoin. I know I'm going to upset a lot of people, but I'm not saying it means you don't understand it. I'm just saying it's not the Bitcoin experience. You're not self-custodying peer-to-peer electronic cash and transacting with it. You're holding a stock in a portfolio at a brokerage. So it's pretty different, but it's moving fast, right? And it's accelerating, and it's exciting, and people get impatient when the price doesn't move for a whole week sometimes, or stays flat. So there's a lot of excitement about price. There's a lot of excitement about what Bitcoin may mean, which is, and all of these things are retroactive, or they're in a feedback loop. So people get excited about the price. They create ideas of what it would mean, what would need to be true for the price to go 10x from where it is. They start talking about that. Some of those ideas are good enough that people start to dabble in them, and they do some of these things, and the price starts to move up. Not necessarily 10x overnight, but it starts to move. And so we're seeing a lot of trial and error, and and that which works keeps going, and that which fails gets forgotten until maybe its time comes again, or people just use it as evidence that it's not interesting. At the same time, I think there's a lot of interesting technical stuff happening with respect to Lightning and Nostr and eCash mints, and that doesn't get quite as much play in the press, but it's actually the more important and fundamental stuff. Like, when the dot-com bubble came, everyone focused on, oh, look at the price of all these dot-com stocks, and then it crashed, and they thought the internet went away. But the whole time, companies like Google were building better search, and the ISPs were building always-on, high-speed, reliable connectivity, and the internet was still growing and changing, despite the fact that Wall Street thought the internet went away in 2001, when in fact was still growing. And so I think those foundational technical aspects of Bitcoin's usability, ease of use, all, scalability, all of those things are still making lots of headway. And that's really what's most important.
You mentioned something that I think about a lot, which is the American Revolution and in Bitcoin and the Bitcoiners, and people trying to educate. In the American Revolution, there wasn't many people that fought. It was only a couple % of people, and most people were against it, or they didn't care. They're apathetic, and that's what it feels like we're in now, to a degree, where it feels like, and I forget what you said just now, but you made me think of this, where is it just going to be a few % of the people? Oh, it was the .com thing, where people are focusing on the wrong thing. It feels like just general society is always kind of focused on the wrong thing instead of the thing that's actually the important thing. And where you have like 3% of the people were fighting the Revolutionary War, and the other 97% weren't, or they weren't involved. And then they got the freedom, though. The 3% won and dragged everyone to the finish line. And everyone got to benefit from the freedom, at least inside the walls of America. And so
Yeah.
does it feel like that to you, where it's just a handful of percent of people who are going to drag everyone kicking and screaming, and then it's like, oh, this was obvious, like now we all have it, yay? Like, is that
Yeah, the
what we're in
beauty
for?
is that's the nature. That's the nature of innovation, right? Like it starts and everybody's poo-pooing it and laughing at it and saying it'll never work and it doesn't work. And this is especially true with what becomes exponential innovation, because when it's small, people look at it and say, look, there's only a few people doing it. It doesn't make any sense, rather than projecting and saying, well, what if forget the obstacles to everyone using it right now. What if everybody used it? What would its value be? How might it transform the world? And when you've got the white headphones, and I remember when the iPod first came out, there was no iPhone,
Yes.
but the iPod came out and it had these trademark white headphones because nobody else had ever issued white headphones. They're always black. And you started to walk around the streets of your city, and you would see some people with the white headphones, and you could feel that there's a transformation taking place. These people have 1,000 songs in their pocket. They're living in the future already. And I remember in New York, people started selling white headphones with strings attached to nothing, just so that you could have the status symbol of walking around as if you had an iPod. And of course, now everyone's got, the whole thing's transformed. There aren't record stores anymore. It's transformed the music industry, not necessarily for the better, but we just expect to have all the music in the world at our fingertips all the time, not only that which we can afford to buy, and then to decide which of it to carry with us, because we've only got one pocket and it'll only hold, 90 minutes of music on a Walkman or something. So the people who are pioneering and spearheading this movement are revolutionaries, or they're the innovators, way ahead of even the early adopters, and that's the stage we're at. But the change, as we've seen with both the internet and its impact on things like the music industry and whatnot, these changes, they happen somewhat gradually. It's not that they happen gradually and then suddenly, exactly as people think, oh, suddenly, one day it pivoted. It's like suddenly one day you look backwards and you see, well, everybody's got white headphones, right? Everybody's got earbuds. How did that happen? When exactly did it happen? Was it, it took place over 7 years or 25 years, depending on what you call the starting period. But it's transformed everyone and everything. And that, I think, is what's going to happen with this whole movement of the reclaiming freedom on the internet, moving away from centralized things owned by the government or owned by technocrats who dictate what will happen because they're incentivized to sell advertising or just to make as much money for themselves as possible. And our mental health and our experience, takes a back seat to what the interests of the company are.
And again, you touched on something here that I was just thinking of recently as well, which is why is technology easy to see, or easier to see, like the iPod thing, right? Or the AirPods and all these different things. It feels like, or like ChatGPT, for instance, another great thing where all of a sudden it was like the fastest adopted thing over like a year span or a month or whatever it was. There's just like 10 million downloads in a month. It's like the fastest adopting technology ever type of thing. But why it feels like money, for whatever reason, when you have this, we'll call it perfect money. I know it's hard to call anything in life in this human world perfect, but it's the most perfect thing we have is in the form of money. But why are people so resistant to that? And is it like just because it's such an emotional thing, and our time and energy, our value is tied up in this thing, where like technology, it seems like, oh yeah, people just adapt to it and they're like, oh yeah, sure, I'll take it, I'll use it, I'll do whatever. But like money, it's like, you're bite scratching and clawing just to like talk to somebody about the money they're using. They're like, whoa, buddy, like you can't talk about this. Why do we have such a hard time with money? But with technology, people they don't ask questions. It's just like, yes, I'm doing it.
I think because there's a few things. One is, unlike technology, which creates abundance of the technology, like there's white headphones for everybody in the world, right? And the internet is intended to replicate its content everywhere, and that's why content has been driven down practically free, right? You pay some company $20 a month, you can have all the music in the world forever, the whole thing, or all the video in the world for free on YouTube. You just got to sit and watch some ads. So the nature of this information technology is that it replicates itself and makes itself viral and attaches to everyone. The nature of money is that it's scarce, and that it's meant to be finite, or growing at a very slow rate, because you want it to buy more, and so people hoard it or hold on to it, and and it's filled with scams kind of as the second point, right? With technology, like you can put the headphones in and like you hear the music and it plays, and it's not, you leave the store and then it stops working. So then you return it. Like, but with money, that's not the case. People don't understand how it works in the first place. There's been, uh, a concerted effort to ensure that people are confused about the nature of money. And so they want to, they're not going to give you their real dollars for fake Bitcoin. Right? And so the ability to demonstrate the benefits of Bitcoin are much harder to demonstrate than the ability, like you had no music in your ears and now you stick 2 byte pods in your ears and there's a little screen and you can call up any song in the world. It's a very different thing, and people don't even appreciate what's broken about the existing money. So we're kind of introducing something into a world that has a solution, albeit a broken solution, and a solution that's causing lots of breakages, but has been ignorant of the breakages, right? It's been ignorant of the fact. In fact, most people, they vote aggressively to get the government to spend more money that it doesn't have on things that it shouldn't be doing. And that's the dilemma that we have. And we're still so far away because so many people have lived their whole lives without sound money. Like nobody has lived with sound money for their whole lives. Right? We've all grown up in a fiat standard where, we're either in a country that issues its own currency that's depreciating somewhat slowly or quickly, or we're in a country that's unable to issue its own currency. And as a result, there's significant exploitation by the country whose currency you are using. And so there's a blindness to what the right way to live is, or what the better way to live is. And there's so much change, and so many people are employed by the finance industry, which wouldn't exist under a sound money standard. They're busy investing and trying to figure out how to make returns on money that's otherwise depreciating, which you wouldn't have to do if your money wasn't depreciating. I saw an interesting chart today that shows that really the stock market has, over the course of the last, I think it was 50 years, only beaten gold by 20% in total. So for all the activity, all the people who are doing all the investing and advising and everything else, they've managed to return 20% more, not every year, but 20% over the course of 50 years. That's like, a quarter of a percent compound annual rate. And we've got so many people working on that who could have been creating genuine wealth, right? Not just gambling on which stock will go up or down or the other, inventing things, improving things, doing work, like building things, but none of them have been doing anything other than playing the financialization game, which has gotten really out of control. And so I think it's very hard for people to see. You aspire, if you are good at math and get accepted to a good school, to be something in finance, right? An investment banker or a broker or something that's a master of the world, doing leveraged buyouts. And we make heroes of these people. But the truth is, and it's not that they're villains, it's just they're doing what the world around them pays best to do. But it's not what's actually in the best service of themselves ultimately, or of civilization. We have this broken component, and until we fix it, which we're in the process of doing, things will continue to be broken that way.
Absolutely wild. Jordy Visser this week, I was watching an interview, said that the markets broke. They're broken for the first time. He's like, I've never seen anything like this before. It feels like Bitcoin's decoupling. It feels like it's also suppressed at the same time. Like, what do you like? I don't. All this what we're talking about, it makes me think of. I don't pay attention to the macro nearly as much as I used to. And this, to your point, is why I just thought of this, where I had some of these things that I wanted to touch on with you. And at the same time, it feels unnecessary. It feels moot. When you're sitting in Bitcoin and you're saving in Bitcoin, a lot of these things that like you said, you have your job and then you have to become an investment manager as well. Or you just become a Wall Street guy, or you just go to the street in general. And you that's what society is incentivizing in essence. But because of Bitcoin, it feels like, hey, I can just relax, and I do relax more. I don't pay attention to macro as much. Is that something you've noticed as well, just in yourself? Like, it's because I've noticed that big time in myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to hear it coming from a young person such as yourself. I've been in Bitcoin for 12 years now. It's like and so I've been through 3 halvings. and seen the roller coaster ride. And you get to be like that Mr. Bean on the roller coaster ride, where you're just completely comfortable. No matter what happens, nothing really phases you. You can sip a tea while the roller coaster is going on. But people talk about how Bitcoin changes you, and the longer that you're in Bitcoin, the less concerned you become with, well, what's the politician going to say? Because it's not going to affect Bitcoin, right? Like it does affect the dollar, it does affect your income tax rate, it does affect all these things that are part of the fiat world. But the more you sit back and relax on the Bitcoin ride, the more you realize it's not affecting the supply, it's not affecting my ability to self-custody the thing. The price is steadily going up on a zoomed out basis. I'm getting wealthier. And we're moving towards a world where more and more people will realize this, and there will be a bigger network of people with whom I can Bitcoin and I can Nostr. And so you actually start to experience real freedom from the vagaries, is the word I'm looking for, from the vagaries of the politicized financial system. And as you do, you start to have less burdens on you, right? It's like slavery today is not there's a taskmaster with a whip saying, come and do this. But there is psychologically that thing. You wake up in the morning and it's like the electric bill is coming and the water bill is coming and the heating bill is coming and the Netflix bill is coming and the cell phone bill is coming and the internet bill is coming. And like all of these things are saying work, 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 deliver, deliver, deliver. And some of these things you don't want to do all as much as you have to do. You have to, and it's not to say that you shouldn't be responsible and that we don't all at some point have to do things that we don't want to do, but we haven't gotten all the technology that we've created that's been productivity enhancing hasn't delivered the benefits to us of freeing us from worry about all of these things. Like we're all still deeply worried, and that's the abuse that we're all suffering. And I think the longer you're in Bitcoin, the less you worry. In part because you're better off, because you put your money where the future is, but also in part because you're freed from the vagaries of the whims of the political environment, which changes all the time and rug pulls everybody here and there. So I'm myself, I'm certainly experiencing this freedom. And to be frank, at first you don't really know what to do with it because you're so habituated to, what do I need to wake up and worry about today? And when you wake up and there's not that much to worry about, all of a sudden you start to say, well, I must be out of my mind. Surely if I'm not worrying, I'm ignoring something really relevant. And it's like, no, you found peace, you found freedom, and this is what freedom feels like. And so then you have to challenge yourself and say, well, so what do I do with my freedom? And you may feel some guilt, like I need to give back, I need to sacrifice more and do something, but you may not know what that is, and so then you worry about not knowing what it is. So you have to reach, and I don't want to suggest that I've reached this state myself, but you have to reach some kind of Zen type state where you are comfortable with what you've achieved, that you've worked for, that you've gotten much of it, and that there may be something that you're passionate about continuing to work towards and figuring out how to work towards it where the reward isn't, and now I get rich and I can spend more money. And like, I think this is a big part of the transformation of Bitcoin, but you could say it would be the transformation to any sound money, is you're not chasing money without limitation. First of all, there isn't an infinite amount of money to chase. And when you've got enough and you're not concerned about status symbols and you're not concerned about, the potential inflation of the money supply so that you need to overstock it, you can start to think about, well, what else is higher up on the values than those things that money can buy, or those things that I need that money will buy, and I can focus on other things. And that transition for people is, it's what sits at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it turns out very few of us actually get to explore that, or got to explore it under the fiat standard. And more of us who step outside that system and into the Bitcoin system are able to start exploring, well, what really matters to me? What do I really want to work on? That's self-actualization. And for some people, it is productive work. They do want to create code or create a business that does something for other people. For other people, it's an internal, personal, spiritual journey. And there's a whole spectrum of activities in between. I think what you're going to start seeing is more and more people who are in Bitcoin, who've been in Bitcoin for longer periods of time, first of all, going through the struggle of recognizing that they've achieved freedom, and then the struggle of what they want to do with it, and then observing that they're starting to go down that path. And maybe we'll be fortunate enough to see a lot of people really excel at that path and kind of chart a course that many more of us can be inspired by. I'm not saying you walk the same path as anybody else because you're an individual, but in seeing more individuals walking the path of independence and self-actualization, you start to realize, oh, there's something more. Because right now, all the people who've been billed as heroes, it's like, oh, look at the yacht he bought, and look at the mansion that he has, and look at the fun parties that he goes to and throws. And it's like, well, there's more to life than the lifestyles of the rich and famous, right? The lifestyles of the enlightened and satisfied would be a really interesting thing for people to focus on highlighting.
Yeah, that's so well said. Do you think that people they're going to leave those jobs? So somewhat putting a bow on this, kind of wrapping what we've been talking about up here for a little bit. Do you think it's like if someone starts today, number one, I feel like two thoughts in my head. What does someone need to do today to, because a lot of people would say, well, Tomer, I can't do that. You did that 12 years ago. I wasn't in. And it's like the old saying of, well, 12 years ago is the best time. The second best time is today. Start saving in Bitcoin today.
Yeah.
Do you think, what do you like, is that possible? What you're experiencing now, is that possible for someone starting today? Is it maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line for them as well? Like, what do you see when it comes to that? And then also,
Sure.
is it, so say someone's leaving that world of financialization, maybe they're on Wall Street, or maybe they're a chef somewhere, wherever they're working, whatever they're doing, but they're now going and building something, right? They're starting to save, and they're on that journey. Said, okay, Tomer, I'm going to do that. But are they leaving that world of financialization in some way, and then coming to, I shouldn't say chef, but it's some financialized place. Maybe it's a mortgage company or
No,
whatever
I
it
think
is.
it's a good. It's
Yeah.
actually it's a good example because it's not, you're not singling out a chef, but it's a good example of a working class person
Mm-hmm.
who shows up to work, does something that requires a skill that they can be passionate about, that they can do beautifully, that they can also do poorly, but that they get paid for it. And and they typically don't get a pension, right? And so
Yeah. Right.
they might not even get particular benefits, and so they need to they end up worried about their future, right? And so they're not as good a chef as they otherwise would be because they're not getting paid enough to set aside enough for their retirement. And it's always in the back of their head. Like they may be in flow state while they're at work, the fire's going and
Mm-hmm.
the presentation's happening. And so they distract, but then work's over and the stress sets in. And I think even, if you only make the change that you're still fiat mining, as the expression is in the Bitcoin world, but then you take that fiat and you set aside some every week to put into Bitcoin, or every month to put into Bitcoin, over time, that worry will go away. It will turn into a very different emotion. It's like this emotion of excitement, like, oh my goodness, I've got enough money that if this keeps going on for the next 3 or 4 years, maybe I'll be able to retire early. Maybe I'll be able to open up my own restaurant. Maybe I'll be able to do something else. Like it opens up possibilities that being on the treadmill of the fiat race never open up to you. So I think that this is not Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. It's not a snap your fingers, buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin today and tomorrow you're a millionaire. That's the lottery, and the lottery for the overwhelming majority of people never pays off and just loses money. Bitcoin is a savings technology that appreciates over time, that increases your freedom over time, right? It's a freedom acquisition technology, and to have a large degree of freedom, you have to actually put a lot of work in your life if it's going to be a fair world, right? So I do think that if someone's just getting started, recognizing that you can enter a world where you can work towards freedom, you can work towards a reasonable retirement, you can work towards all these goals that take a long time of working towards, and choose to excel at your job and be able to excel at your job without the distracted worry of, oh, I need to gamble my money on the lottery, cryptocurrencies, or stocks and bonds, and I don't understand that world because my passion is being a chef. My passion is understanding food. I don't understand discounted net present value of future cash flows that's attached to risk and tax schemes. Like that whole financialization world exists in this really abstract mathematical world where the money is made up and, and central regulators move levers around that make people rich and poor overnight. And it's a game you can't win because...
Hold on 1 second. If you are holding your Bitcoin on an exchange still or sharing your keys and your KYC information with a third party, everything you're learning about right now is completely moot. This is your wake-up call. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. Bitcoin is the first and only asset in human history where humans can actually custody entirely their asset. Custody sounds daunting at first, and believe me, it was for me 10 years ago, and I missed a year or two of massive gains, and I don't want that to be you. It's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Asbach and the Bitcoin Way. His team will train you to do it right the first time. We just interviewed Tony the other day, has 50,000 views, an unbelievable response. People love him and his story and what he has to share and his mission. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. So quit sitting on your hands like I did a decade ago and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/Brandon. Now back to the show.
You don't have the mathematical skills, the years of experience, the connections to be close to the money printer, all of those things. But you don't have to live in that world anymore, right? I think that's the beauty of what Bitcoin offers. And you don't need anybody's permission. You just start saving in Bitcoin and you've exited that world. And now you're entering the world of the future. And it's going to take time to get to the future. Like the future is not, you don't have a time machine that sends you to the future, which, by the way, you don't want, because you don't. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you don't want to. You want to build a good life for when you're 55, but you don't want to be 55 yet. There's still a lot of great experiences to have in your 20s and 30s, and one of them is having the self-esteem and the self-confidence that you are in charge of your future, that you are saving in something that is saving for your future and what you will choose to do with it. You're not having money deducted from your account, every week to make a promise of Social Security that you may or may not receive, that certainly won't purchase in the future what it claims to be purchasing today. So it's a step of responsibility. To some degree, it's a leap of faith. Although I think if you study Bitcoin, which does require study, so it's not an automatic learning thing. But if you do study it, you'll have a lot of confidence that the promises that it's making will be held to account for your whole lifetime. Right? Like the 21 million supply will not be shattered. It will retain its scarcity, and the permissionlessness will be retained, and your ability to self-custody it will be retained. Your ability to spend it without censorship will be retained. All of those things are true about it and unchangeable about it. And so, hooray, you've entered a world where those things are true. And they're not true in the fiat world. The supply will be inflated massively. You might be censored from using it. You need to ask the bank permission to take your money out. Like all of these things are in high contrast between the two systems, and you don't know what will be. People wait on bated breath for what one Wednesday Jerome Powell's going to say that nobody knows 10 minutes beforehand what he's going to say. I know exactly what it's going to be in terms of supply issuance for Bitcoin. So that certainty is really powerful, to be able to see into the future. We know 210,000 blocks every 4 years. We know what the reward is. We know that it's permissionless. So I'm starting to repeat myself, but it's a really dramatic difference from, you don't know who's going to win the next election, what their policies are going to be. Even if they promised certain things, their promises aren't worth much, because if the polls don't show that they're popular, they're going to switch around and come up with something different and blame somebody else. And it's just that endless world of worry that the news networks feed off of, creating that worry and trying to find the next crisis. Like, that just doesn't happen in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, people are fighting over whether we change one line of code to allow a slightly larger data set in one type of transaction. And they're creating some worry, but none of them are worried that this is the end of Bitcoin or that it's going to damage the value of Bitcoin. Certainly. So, that was a long I got to catch my
No, it's
breath.
beautiful, Tomer. This is what the long form is for, so we can riff on stuff like this and not be constrained, and not let our thoughts, our mind be constrained. That I want to touch on some macro stuff here. Ironically, that's kind of why I brought it up earlier. Kind of, saying that because it's it's the world we live in. It's like I always think of, like, when Bitcoiners, obviously we talk about this a lot, of like there's the fiat world we live in and the Bitcoin world. It's like you have to live in both worlds, and that's why I think confuses, at least seemingly to me, it confuses a lot of people, and they have a very hard time. Or when you're talking to someone who isn't a Bitcoiner or whatever, they have a very hard time. Like, well, you're talking dollars, but you just said Bitcoin, and it's hard, and it's your two things can be true, and I think that is a lot of societies having an issue with that. And you mentioned something earlier that the dollar is volatile, and then also you just mentioned what made me think of the fiat is just rudderless. It's, Bitcoin has the issuance. It's, exactly what's going on, exactly what's happening, but fiat is just rudderless. It's just a ship out to sea without a rudder, without a sail. We have no idea where it's going. And in saying all of that, what are your thoughts on the price of in dollars? Again, this is why it's so tough. Of there's being suppression. Obviously, there's Coinbase talking of is there a paper Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. Because this world where it's tough, and we have to talk about it. And that's why I bring this up. Of there's two worlds we live in, and the average person is seeing it and being like, well, what's going on, guys? How come it's going up and down? And you mentioned earlier, again, the fiat is volatile, the dollar is volatile, but Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Can we, touch on that first, and I have a follow-up question, actually.
Like I think it's so important that you detach, or that you first recognize that the volatility is the dollar, right? It's Donald Trump says X and all the stocks crash, and gold maybe goes up or it maybe goes down, and Bitcoin does something else, and people say, is it decoupling or is it coupled? Like, that's all fiat thinking, right? Jerome Powell says we're going to lower interest rates by 0.25%, but and then he issues some words of warning, and so the stock market rises and falls, and like that's the volatility and chaos of a world where you have rulers with power that's completely out of control. If trillions of dollars of value get created on a single word that they say, and then destroyed on another word that they say, like, that's, you don't want to live in that world, but you do if you live in fiat. And so when you step outside and you move to the Bitcoin world, it's not that you don't see that there's that fiat world there. Like, there's all these people living in that fiat world. Donald Trump still comes out and says, I changed my mind about the tariffs. And Jerome Powell says he can't fire me. And this, so that all still happens, and you still see the waves, but the supply of Bitcoin doesn't change. The block size doesn't change. The block frequency doesn't change. Everything on your side, you're sitting in the sea of tranquility, of pure calm. Nothing's changing except for when you want to interface with that world, because a car that you like cost $47,000, and everything's changing in price right now. The stocks and gold are going up, and Bitcoin is changing in terms of the dollar, but Bitcoin's not changing in terms of Bitcoin. And so that serenity that you're after, you don't have complete access to it, because you got to keep stepping into that world to transact, to buy a hamburger, and to do other stuff. But you have the knowledge that you're holding onto something that's perfectly stable and perfectly steady and indestructible and reliable and authentic and genuine, and like all of those really wonderful attributes of Bitcoin. So sometimes you have to pinch your belt because there's crazy shit going on in the fiat world, or because some other people who thought they were in the Bitcoin world gave all their money to FTX, and FTX blew up, and and there's a hangover effect, right? Of people thinking, well, Bitcoin blew up, even though Bitcoin didn't blow up, because in the fiat world, they can't distinguish between Bitcoin and someone else who said, give me your Bitcoin. So there's still a lot of growing up to do, but the more conviction that you have, which comes from the more study and time that you put into Bitcoin, the less those things bother you. And you accept that there are times that things are going to be lean, right? We might call those, from the fiat perspective, there's been a big correction in the price of Bitcoin, but it's a lean time. So you tighten your belt and you wade through it. And then there are good times, and you try to maintain your wits about you and not let your wealth get to your head and then spend frivolously, only to find that the next time that there's a lean time, you've spent all your money and you wish you had more of it. And I think that part of living that Bitcoin life is something that really prepares you for the ultimate journey, the more important journey that you'll be on, which isn't a journey of frivolously spending and buying yacht vacations and sports cars and things like that, but actually knowing what you want, what you really value in your life, and being able to attain that and achieve that while filtering out of your life the things you really don't want to do. Right. And so the more responsible you are, the more you hold on to the sound money, the better. I think, I know you want to talk about what will the world look like when the price of Bitcoin reaches something very significant in fiat terms. And well, maybe that's what we should kind of start pivoting into, in fact.
Yeah. I think we're almost there. We're working our way through here. And my last thing on this and is you mentioned FTX. Is this because you have like, Jeff Booth and George Gammon have done endless hours of debate back and forth where, they're on the same page. A lot of maybe high level thinkers will call it. They might disagree on like one thing. And I know what theirs seems to be. It's George believes that people just won't be trained like another generation from now or another fourth turning from now. People won't remember what this time was like, and they'll just revert back to the same games. Do these blowups of FTX or if Coinbase is doing it, or if the government or someone else is doing it, do we go back to the Max Kaiser quote of "You don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you," where like eventually people will blow themselves up enough where they realize, to your point, oh, Bitcoin's not changing. That's not the thing that's changing. It's always constant. It's true north. I have to now live in that system. I'm not going to change this system. It's going to change me. And I have to now acquiesce. I now have to conform to the system we're living in. Is that where we're kind of headed?
Yeah, I think that's like we live in a time where you can choose either of the two worlds, and a spectrum exists. In fact, that you can choose. I can put half my money in Bitcoin and half my money in all sorts of fiat things and gamble, and many people actually do that. They put 10% of their money in Bitcoin, and if they have enough conviction that they keep that 10% and don't touch it, 10 years later they look around and they say, "Well, I'm 90% in Bitcoin. How did that happen?" And go, Bitcoin rose in fiat value, and all this other fiat shenanigans that you didn't really accomplish anything. In fact, they may have lost you money. And that the same is true if you played around in crypto. So getting part way into the new world with conviction, even if you have little conviction, so put a smaller amount, but stay invested. Don't panic sell when the price goes down, and don't panic sell when the price goes up, right? But stay invested allows you to have the new world grow if that thesis is correct. Like if you don't have conviction that thesis is correct, you can still, being a believer in diversification, diversify into it in a way where you don't diversify back out of it, because its promise isn't, well, it'll beat the market by 10%. It's a promise is like the market is going to be destroyed and this is what will replace it. So you just have to have the right kind of framing around it. So I think that's what's really important, right? That you get yourself into the new world and pay enough attention to it that you can make the mental shifts so that as it grows, you're prepared, you're living within that world. It has a different set of rules, and like you said, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. You do have to surrender to that change, or you do have to even embrace it and run into it. And it's a really positive experience, but there are many sacred cows that get slaughtered along the way. This belief that the government should issue money, that the government can issue money, that the government will do benevolent things with the money that they issue. That's part of that whole orange pilling and red pilling exercise where you say, well, there's a lot of slippage. Maybe they're not doing all the right kind of things. Maybe there's corruption. Maybe there's things that they should be stopped from doing. And the only real way to stop them from doing it is to stop them from printing money and giving it to themselves.
So as we transition to this, like we just alluded to, of what the future is going to look like on this unstoppable path we're on, what were some of the big aha moments for you in Bitcoin? For me, and I'll give you two of mine, were when I saw the log chart of Bitcoin. So again, going back to this, it's not a linear, you can't look at it in a linear way. You have to look at it in an exponential way and see the network effects. Linear, it looks like, oh, this is really volatile asset. So exactly what we've been talking about. And you see, whoa, it's a network effect. And then also holding money in your head. and seeing, just
Mhm.
that process of understanding you
Yeah.
could hold your wealth, your value in your head. So those are two of my massive things, 5, 6,
Yeah.
7 years ago. What were
Right.
some huge pivotal moments for you?
I think the most memorable and accessible one for me is that Bitcoin um, exists and operates even if in your country, in the geography that you call your country, even if your country fails, it's built to last for
Mm,
forever. So I was walking through the forest one day over here in Canada, and there was a big tree, and I was like really in tune with the forest, and I was like, this tree is older than Canada, right? And if this tree was aware, that like, there's no such thing as Canada, right?
mm-hmm,
Can't you draw pictures of the Earth, and then you draw lines, you draw pictures on the pictures, and you say this part of the picture is called Canada, but Canada didn't exist here forever. This land did, and Canada won't exist forever, but this land will. And Bitcoin doesn't need Canada to exist. It doesn't need the United States to exist. It exists independent, and what it needs to exist is that there's energy, right? And it doesn't need to be a lot of energy. It just, it needs for the rules of math to not change and the laws of physics to not change. Well, as far as we know, those things aren't going to change. And they're eternal in a sense, or at the very least, they're as old as the universe. And so, like, Bitcoin will outlast nations. You don't have to vote your way to national prosperity and hope that your national currency survives so that you still have purchasing power. If all the nations of the world went away, Bitcoin would still be operative. And that to me was a really profound insight, right? Because nations do come and nations do go, and Bitcoin will still always be there as long as there's anybody who values and wants it to be there. It ran alone it ran on one person's efforts when Satoshi was running it by himself. It ran on two people's efforts when it was just him and Hal and maybe a few people beyond that, and it will run with all 8 billion people supporting it, and it'll run when all these 8 billion people are gone and there's 16 trillion other people who've gone through. The thing is built to last forever. And that was kind of like this other aspect of it, like all these decisions that were made in the engineering of it for it to be survivable weren't just for this thing to survive 20 years or 50 years or 100 years. It's like been built to survive forever. The address space, which is your identity, is 256 bits. Well, that's an address for every atom in the universe, right? Or like for every human being that's going to live for the next 100, until the heat death of the universe, including all the smart agents we might create. And the nature of the database, the blockchain, it's just links of 256-bit strings, the SHA-256s, which there's, again, as many of those as there are atoms in the universe. So we can have essentially infinitely large database, and it's already built to support all of that. Like Bitcoin is built to last forever, and that's just so mind-boggling. I'm a little bit older, so I went through the Y2K bug when it turned out that all these engineers of software systems hadn't even planned until 10 years in the future when they built all these mainframe applications, and everything had to be rewritten and recoded. And Satoshi didn't just plan until the end of his lifetime, right? He planned for forever. And so, Bitcoin exists independent of all of the politics that we have that surround us today. And it exists independent of any politics we might create in the future, and it'll last forever. And that to me was just so humbling and maybe even a little bit scary, but
mm-hmm.
the confidence that it gave me in Bitcoin, it's like, whatever happens, Bitcoin will still be here. And that's really powerful. I know some people say, well, if all the electricity goes, then Bitcoin won't be here. And there's some people who say, well, you could do it on paper. But the truth of the matter is, if all the electricity goes, the population of the Earth is going down by 95%, maybe 99%,
Yeah.
right? It's going down to where the population of the Earth was before we had abundant energy. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of charts, and, people say causation and correlation are not the same thing, but you take a look at how much, energy humanity is producing, particularly through fossil fuels, and how long people live and how big the population of the Earth is. And those things are really perfectly correlated, because the cause of energy is the ability to reproduce and feed 7 billion people. So we've got bigger problems if the electricity goes out. And I think Bitcoin as well as this is does one other thing, which I think is really profound. And this will be the last one: is it encourages the energy abundance, right? It pays energy producers directly, not through regulations, not through saying, there's a value to other people of the energy. It says, I, Bitcoin, will pay my block rewards to those people who have access to energy, right? And use it to direct it to me. So I think already we're seeing, and this is one that I wouldn't necessarily give all the credit to Bitcoin, but look at how quickly the shift in the discussion about energy is changing even in the masses, right? The whole view of nuclear as dangerous and toxic and ugly to cheap and efficient and concentrated is happening before our very eyes. A lot of attitudes are changing. This is maybe more short-term political stuff, but towards fossil fuels, people are really questioning just how negative an impact on the environment does the use of fossil fuels have, and maybe we have technology that can improve it rather than abandon the use of it. So there's things are changing already, and they're changing towards favorability towards energy abundance. Some people will say, well, that's all because of AI, and AI is very energy intensive. And so Silicon Valley, now that they want to invest in AI, that's a cynical Silicon Valley view, but it still may be quite right. But at the same time, this benefits Bitcoin, and Bitcoin benefits energy. And so the way that Bitcoin weaves its way into the energy grid, which is this largely decentralized worldwide generation facilities and local distribution facilities, is really fascinating. And there's been so much written about it, and so much more that people continue to study, that I think Bitcoin will actually find it. As an example, I don't think Bitcoin mining companies in their current instantiation, their current form, are going to live for terribly long. I think Bitcoin mining will become part of the energy generating infrastructure, and energy companies will all have Bitcoin integrated into their production capacity, so that they can produce higher base load than is demanded for, except for at peak times. And so they're serving the market during peak times, and they're mining Bitcoin otherwise. But the most efficient energy generating technologies tend to favor a steady output. So, and the world doesn't have a steady demand. So if you're producing up here and this is the peak demand, well, when demand goes down, you can mine Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will always demand as much energy as you can possibly direct at it. The worst thing you can do is slightly speed up the block times by doing that. So I think we'll end up with a lot more nuclear facilities and hydroelectric facilities and less consumable gas facilities, and that'll be for the better. And we'll end up with a lot more power, and a lot more energy means a much better lifestyle for people, much more wealth, real abundance, not printed wealth that buys nothing more, but real energy produces real goods, and real services. So I think we're on our way. That's like just one example of how Bitcoin weaves itself into a productive society with a bright future, right? When Saylor says Bitcoin is hope, it's like, well, it's not going to go away. It's not going to get destroyed, even if your whole country dissolves its politics, and it'll encourage wealth creation through energy abundance. That's all pretty mind-blowing stuff.
That's a perfect segue, because that was the thing I wanted to start with. Let's fast forward to Bitcoin at $1 million. When Bitcoin is at a million fake, currency trash units, dollars or whatever people want to call them.
Yeah.
What does the world look like? So the very first thing I was going to ask you was about mining facilities or the grid or utility companies, and that was really it. So it's a perfect segue. What do you think that it looks like now? To take it a step further, do you think we have some areas where they become freedom cities, where they're built up, new cities come up around prior existing mining facilities and stuff like that? Like, how do you see this really transitioning moving forward?
Yeah, I don't want to be too like, if I was writing a novel, I'd have to concretize some of these ideas in specific examples, but
We'll hold
I
you all
don't.
to them.
But you can certainly imagine that power becomes more widely distributed. The power generation becomes more widely distributed. Right now, it tends to be built where existing cities already are, and it needs to serve large capacities. And there's all sorts of complexities. But and we've been very anti-nuclear for a very long period of time. So the idea of small modular nuclear reactors, which produce like 500 megawatts, or even as low as 50 megawatts, that can be moved around because they can. These are the same things that fit inside and have been working for 30, 50 years inside nuclear submarines and nuclear powered aircraft carriers. So they can move around, right? They can move around in the sea, but you can move them around on land too. And so the ability to place one down, and now you've got the power infrastructure and the heat infrastructure to grow food and power a city, really means that cities no longer need to be located close to power sources, because the power sources can move to the city. So I think you might get, and this is, I don't know if this is at Bitcoin at $1 million or Bitcoin before or after, but you might get the ability to start fully infrastructured cities, with enough energy to power them in all sorts of places without having to build out an energy facility, because you can take what's essentially one of these little new nuclear reactors that can fit in a truck and build a city around that, because it produces enough power to power a city of 100,000 people. So there's more room for people to spread out, and I think that that's really interesting, because right now people are highly divided, and the city cores are getting uglier. There may be some cities in the world that are doing just fine, but from what I see firsthand in Toronto, and from what I read of cities like San Francisco in particular, or New York, or many European cities, there is an erosion of what makes a city great, largely because the fiat system can't provide the support for the countless people now that are living below a poverty line, or just a subsistency line, right? Like the whole point of a city is, well, you live well above the subsistency line, so the city provides art and museums and all sorts of benefits that you don't get if you live in a rural place. But that's kind of shaking. So I think the idea of building micro cities and new communities that people can easily move to without huge trade downs in terms of what they're getting might help alleviate the pressure that the cities are after, and create renewal for the cities, and a new birth, a renaissance for the cities, and a new birth for all sorts of small cities. That's just still continuing on the path of discussing energy, right? Like when we talk about the fact that people aren't begging government to print money to give to them, because the previous government printed money and gave it to other people, and so they had their wealth stolen, and there's this back and forth swinging from left to right, which is really one group getting benefits at the expense of the other, and vice versa. If we don't have that injustice as the central focus of our government, well, then people can live an just life, and they can build their futures with more planful outcomes, and they can spend their energy building their own futures rather than begging the government to give them a future at the expense of somebody else. So I think this sense of abundance, first of all, real abundance grows, and the view of your fellow human being not as a competitor to you, but as a potential contributor, or someone who you don't need to pay attention to, increases dramatically. And so you don't have everybody minding everybody else's business like you do today, right? Today, everybody's pointing, aha, I got you. This guy's corrupt who you're supporting, or that guy's corrupt who you're supporting. Well, why does it matter? Well, it matters because the corruption is stealing from me. So you're spending all this energy saying, how am I being robbed? Who's robbing me? Who's taking advantage of me? And you can just see it in the politics. Again, as a Canadian, I was just meeting with someone yesterday who, a lot of Canadians live in Florida in the wintertime, right? They call themselves snowbirds. Mm-hmm. And they said, this year was a little bit rougher for us as snowbirds, because Americans have always been our friends, but Donald Trump is out there saying Canada's a terrible country. They've been ripping us off. And so we're talking to our American friends, and our American friends are saying, well, either our president's lying to us, you're telling me that my president's lying to me, or why have I been so nice to you all these years when you've really been stealing from me? And so, like, this notion of, and listen,
wild.
I'm not saying it's true that Canadians have been stealing from Americans, but you see it in the left
system,
versus right divide.
Yeah.
In the left versus right divide. It's like the left wing wants to fund certain things at the expense of the right, and the right wants to fund certain things at the expense of the left. They want to cut this, they want to cut that, they want to invest in this, they want to invest in that, and so we're in a competition with our countrymen, with our fellow countrymen, over this politics, and it's why politics has become so divisive and so seemingly important. It used to not be that, right? When there was sound money and free markets to a greater extent, government might have declared who you're going to war with, right? So it's not that it wasn't important, but you weren't going to war with your neighbor. That wasn't the issue, right? And so I think we start to resolve these kinds of problems, and I'll just keep on rolling until you interrupt
Yeah,
me
no, it's perfect.
with other pivots. I think people ask a lot, okay, Bitcoin goes to 1 million. All the people who stack Bitcoin are fine because they're rich. What about the people who didn't stack Bitcoin? And I think they live in a much, much better world than even the people who did stack Bitcoin, because the people who were able to stack Bitcoin were people who were already somewhat successful in the fiat world. They had the ability to save. So their savings increased and they're maybe in a better position. But the people who lived in the world where fiat just meant real purchasing power declines year over year over year to the point where food became unaffordable. Right? Those people, under a sound money standard, under a Bitcoin standard, can expect to get paid a decent wage that isn't exploiting them and diminishing their returns and playing all kinds of psychological games or hidden money games with them. So if you get paid a Satoshi an hour, whatever, like just to be arbitrary, 10 Satoshis an hour, that purchasing power of the 10 Satoshis an hour, if anything, goes up over time, not down. I mean, it's not suddenly it only buys half as much as it did 2 years before because someone increased the money supply. So you have a real sense of what you're earning and what you're deploying against. You have the ability to save it. You probably have less government interfering with you, and you're less spending your energy feeling robbed by somebody else because you're not being robbed by somebody else, right? And so I think the whole society is uplifted, right? There's more energy, there's more productivity. You're able to produce more. You're able to work less. Like I think the greatest, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? The greatest criticism, it's not the exact word I'm looking for, but the greatest criticism of what's failed in the West, despite the advances of industrialization through the 20th and 21st century, is everybody's still expected to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Like if we have all these productivity gains, and we haven't gotten wildly wealthier, it's not like we're all living like kings. We don't have the time to do that because we're all worried about living, and we're shopping at discount supermarkets, and we're buying in bulk, and we're withholding certain things. Like I eat less food, not because I'm on a diet, because food has become unaffordable, right? Why bother making a salad? It's low in nutrition, and all the ingredients are expensive, and it takes effort, and I'm tired from all my work and all. Like I think we are able to reclaim our time and our energy because we have a unit of measuring time and energy that is uninflatable and not gameable. And so we're going to end up with better lifestyles for everybody, including those who aren't necessarily big savers, but are hard workers. And maybe the ability to save actually becomes real for everybody. And maybe also the ability to claim more of your time becomes real for everybody. Like, why do we all still, I just don't get it. Like COVID was a great example of nobody's allowed to go into work anymore. You have to take your laptop at home and do Zoom. And it wasn't that everything collapsed left, right, and center, right? People still managed to get their work done. Um, and, and then afterwards they weren't willing to go back into work, which is a besides the point matter. But it was like, we don't need to work as much, right? But something's stealing everything. Like, there's a sense of, first of all, showing up. If you show up, then at least you're demonstrating that you're willing to work hard, which is fake, right? It's like there's work and there's not work, and all the different fakeries of not, like, whether I stay at home or I show up at the office and do nothing, I'm still doing nothing if I'm doing nothing, right? So what happened that created so much bureaucracy and so much waste, and then so much of this inflationary wealth? Like, why are bankers so rich? Well, because they're close to the money printer, not because they're the most valuable people in our civilization, right? Who needs banking, right? Like it's who needs investment portfolios and M&A and and all that kind of stuff. It's just that's where the money printer is at. That's where the big commissions are at. But it's not where the value in civilization gets created. That gets created, as Michael Saylor rightly points out, through engineering, right? That advances our ability to use energy and materials to produce more wealth. And it also gets advanced through people who are passionate about missions that are valuable for other people, right? And fewer people get to do that because they're busy trying to take care of themselves and their families. And so the ability to be generous and thoughtful about what it would take to help other people is something that we don't have the time for, because our time is being stolen through money printing and politics and all that kind of stuff that we complain about. Oh, there's my initial regurgitation.
Beautiful.
I haven't regurgitated it.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Tomer. You touched on you being closest to the currency printer. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with the term, or it's the Cantillon effect or the Cantillon effect, is what Tomer is talking about. Of that's who benefits in a fiat society, the people closest to the source
Those
of
people who
power,
benefit
the
the most,
spigot.
right?
Yeah, exactly. The currency spigot, whoever's the closest.
Yeah.
Politicians, Nancy Pelosi, stock trackers, bankers. All these things, and then the trade and the tariff thing. I think is fascinating because, again, this goes back to another term which makes me think of is the Triffin dilemma. Isn't that the system we're in? I mean, that's why these things are coming up. Like you said right at the beginning, Donald Trump is trying to,
Yeah.
get manufacturing back here. And it's like we're trying to
Yeah.
fit this new world into an old system. And it's the Triffin dilemma. We have the
Yeah.
world reserve currency. So these trade deficits have to happen, do they not?
Well, I think when you have one world, like what the Triffin dilemma states, as concisely as I can put it, is if one country in particular has the world's reserve currency unit and it's printed without effort, right? So they're like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like it's some rare mineral that's available and
Yeah.
it's hard to extract. So they can print it into oblivion. Um, and they also have, like, I think they have the world's greatest military, the world's greatest navy in this
Mm-hmm.
case, of the United States. So they protect all the trade routes in the world. And what ends up happening is America's exports cease to be automobiles and refrigerators and food and other consumer goods and even other industrial goods. They are dollars and the policing of the world's freightways with their navy, right? And and heaven forbid you decide you don't want to play with the dollar or the freightways, your pipelines blow up mysteriously and your ships sink, and bombs fall from the sky on you. So it's this enforced thing. But what ends up happening is Americans who want to work in middle class jobs, not in jobs that are about money and military, are left having to work in factories in China and in Taiwan, because that's where all the manufacturing goes, right? America's exporting dollars to Taiwan and receiving semiconductors. They're exporting dollars to China and receiving every kind of manufactured good you can imagine. They're exporting dollars to Europe and receiving all sorts of European goods and foods. And so the trade between the two is, there's this world peace that is talked about, right? The Pax Americana, but it's siphoning products out of the rest of the world and hollowing out any kind of professions in the United States that aren't part of the financial, military, industrial complex. And that's not to say that everyone in America does that, but you take a look and see how many fewer manufacturing jobs, how many fewer union jobs there are, how many fewer production jobs there are in America now than there were in the 1950s. And you say, wow, China's really taken over all of this stuff. But that's a outcome that's been created not because China's been cheating and stealing. It's because the United States has the world reserve currency and had taken a very favorable view towards global trade, because we all got tons of stuff cheap at Walmart, right? Which was all imported goods from China and Indonesia and India and all these other places. Hard money fixes that. Unfortunately, tariffs aren't going to fix that, right? Because much of the productivity of the 21st century is automation in manufacturing. So it's like, robots that are working in China might, under a high tariff state, get jobs working in America, but it's still robots doing the work right now. And that to me is where we have to be honest and accept that we don't need human beings to work as hard and as long as they did, which should be a blessing. right? But it's the fear of, well, now I can't earn money because I work hourly, and the expectation of what an hourly wage is meant to produce keeps going down. But that's not the way economics work, right? Like, economics will produce what it can at a cost that people can afford, and you match things up. So if it now costs you 1/10 as much to make something because you've got automation doing it, and it takes you 1/10 as long, you don't need to charge the same amount of money as you used to for it. And so people earning 1/10 as much in a sound money standard, where the unit of currency retains its purchasing power, you'll get this massive deflation. And that's what Jeff Booth talks a lot about. So I won't repeat um, much of what he has to say, especially since we're running out of time. But we should harvest those efficiencies gains in productivity and let the free market distribute them to people, and they will get distributed broadly and widely. This is not a new phenomenon. We've the Luddites were the first people to ever, they were opposed to looms because they handmade fabrics, and looms automated the fabric making, and now they would put all the Luddites out of business. And it's like, well, but the world didn't go unemployed, and quality of life improved, and the standard of work safety improved, and child labor disappeared from the workforce. So all of these things should improve our civilization, and people are in this panic that they're going to make things worse because they can't see 2 steps ahead of what the benefits are. And ultimately, the nature of free markets pushes against even all the obstructions to free markets, depending how severe they are. And we end up getting those benefits, but we make it so hard on ourselves, right? Like, just take a look at how hard we're making it on ourselves to get this Bitcoin standard, right? If we were truly smart and honest and not giving into conflicts of interest, governments would take a look at this and say, what a relief. We don't have to worry about controlling the money printer and winning elections based off of lies and impoverishing our political opponents and this and that and the other. But instead, they look at it and they say, this is, this will take away my power to vote well, to grant wealth to people who haven't earned it in a certain way, but have earned it by giving me their vote. And so how else will I get into power? And their whole sense of power is like, oh, I control where the money goes, right? But that shouldn't be what a politician is in charge of. They should be running on what are the most disciplined ways to increase the wealth of the nation by protecting and preserving people's rights and free markets. And we don't have any of that right now.
I love how you said that, Tomer. We talked about this earlier with this people fearing the change and technology. Seemingly, they adopt it easier. Money have a little bit harder time with, like you mentioned earlier, probably because money's more ephemeral as well, and technology, you can see it. You got music in my ears, and so it's a little more tangible. And where money is a psychological engine. It's ephemeral, so it is tougher in that sense. How are people acquiring Bitcoin in the future? Like, when Bitcoin's at a million, like when does the world stop accepting fiat? For Bitcoin, like at some point there's just a no-go zone, a no bid zone, where people are like, nah, I'm not accepting that anymore. And so what does that world look like? And the other thing I want to say too is, you maybe think of the rising tide lifts all boats. Does it not? Like, if people are on the Bitcoin standard, there's a couple things we can unpack this. So I'll help you remember through this, but you just made me think of so many things where people, I'm late to the game. Well, when we have abundant energy, all these things you've outlined,
Yeah.
it's incredibly important. Even if you're the last person to the game, you still are going to benefit from this society.
For sure.
The last person to get Bitcoin, to earn Bitcoin, et cetera. So I'd love you to start unpacking this. And like I said, I'll kind of help walk us through that. But
it's hard to make precise predictions, but you could end up, as you say, with a world that starts accelerating into Bitcoin. The world gets better and then starts to decelerate from Bitcoin. Like, the acceleration rate of Bitcoin slows down.
Uh-huh.
It has one of these S-shaped curves because, there is no crisis. Everyone was saying, like, I remember this with the internet, right? I worked at a newspaper company, and in 2005, I was saying, like, the internet's coming again, guys. We better watch out. And they're like, no, the internet went away in 2001. Why are you suddenly saying it? And indeed, right? Like, the attention focused away. It was the information superhighway is coming, pets.com, watch out. Bricks and mortar is finished. And none of that happened in the short time frame. And the stock market crashed, the NASDAQ crashed like from 5,000 to 1,000. And everybody thought, and all these internet companies went out of business. And so people thought, okay, well, the internet was overhyped and it's not really anything that big, but it was slow and steady, and it was kind of invisible, right? Everyone was signing, the economy was good. Everyone was buying high speed internet instead of that ridiculous dial up thing that you couldn't talk to somebody on the phone when it happened, when someone else in the house was using the internet. And then Google went public, or what, something happened where there was just this point of change, and it didn't happen exactly for everybody. Like I was sensitive to it because I had little kids at the time, and my wife realized that she could buy them designer clothes off of eBay. They would wear it, they would outgrow it in 3 weeks. And then she could sell the designer clothes for as much or more than she paid for them. So my kids were dressed in designer clothes rather than ordinary clothes, and it was cheaper because she was ready to put the work into PayPal and eBay and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, the world has changed. Like something's really gone on. So I ended up focusing a lot of my career on the internet because I could see this isn't the world that it was 5 years ago. But it wasn't that the whole world was crazy about it. We were still in that, like in my newspaper boardroom meetings, they were still like, the internet went away, Tomer. What the heck are you talking about? And so this is not a smooth curve, right? This is not a stepwise curve. There are people who are conservative in nature, who are progressive in nature. There are people who are smart. There are people who are less smart. There are people who like to see change. There are people who are resistant to change. And so civilization is just this mixture of all these people, and they all want to be what their preferences are to be right at any given point in time. And so at any indication that their preferences are becoming right again, they'll get lazy about having to do the things that made their preferences wrong. They want to go back into their comfort zone. And so I think we will have this jagged approach. And that's why perhaps the Bitcoin price chart looks like it does. Why has it got all these big dips and everything else? It's like people think it's gone away, but it didn't. The blocks kept coming one after the next while everyone was talking about FTX, or everyone was talking about BitConnect or some other scam, right? And the price came back, and the interest came back harder and bigger and stronger. And so I like, for me, who lived through the coming of the internet and the growth of the internet with all its bumps along the way, the mapping of the two experiences is really, really, like, conceptually, it's practically identical. I appreciate that there's harder things about changing the money, which is now infiltrating not just companies, but it's infiltrating government and banks and like some of the most fundamental institutions, but it's still having the same impact and consequence on them. And we're still in the early days of that. So I think it's really hard for people to see, because they're still voting their way to change rather than stepping outside the system into a changed and clear system.
One really quick follow-up on this question: do you think that we have this nation state, currency, fiat? Do you think we have this long into the future where it's, I don't know, is it some type of UBI or, something like that, where maybe half of society or a bunch of societies on a Bitcoin standard or a sound money standard, and then you've got people in this government currency still? Like, how do you see that playing out down this timeline?
It's that one's a little harder to say, because I think you do see the fiat world just getting smaller and smaller and smaller at some point, right? And eventually it crunches so that the fiat dollar purchases nothing. It just disappears. You say, like, do you remember when we used to use the dollar? It's kind of like, as I would say, do you remember when people used to like, you went on a subway and everybody was reading a newspaper? When was the last time you saw someone reading a newspaper? Right? It's just like, It's been obsoleted. But this is fundamentally so much bigger. That I think it takes a lot longer to penetrate its way. And we're still building a lot of it. It's not like if tomorrow everyone became enlightened, that all the scaling technology is actually built and bug-free and user-friendly, right? There's still a lot of building going on. So we're in the construction phase of this thing. At some point, because we've never been through this before, like in the past, fiat currencies that have collapsed rather suddenly, and they were followed by a state of war. Right. That, like, I do think we have an opportunity with Bitcoin to avoid a collapse in a state of unrest, civil unrest, and war. There are people who say buy Bitcoin and bullets, right? And there are people who say, buy Bitcoin and you'll be fine. I tend to be in that latter camp. I can't guarantee it, right? But I think I think Bitcoin is so elastic in its flexibility and like it's ubiquitous, right? Anywhere someone wants Bitcoin to be, it's there, right? You download a wallet, you create a node, all the Bitcoin is there. Your ability to use it is there. So it's a form of civilization, and all of its rules are there. So it's a form of civilization that can spread to wherever the demand for it exists. We just don't have that much demand for it right now, and I think that's why it'll be this peaceful revolution in so many different ways, and it's growing so peacefully. Like before, when fiat collapsed, there was nothing to replace it aside from gold, which gold doesn't do what Bitcoin does, right? It was already hoarded. Like if today,
if you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, hey, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
if today fiat collapsed and people wanted a gold standard, where's the gold? Like maybe it's in Fort Knox, maybe it isn't, but it's not accessible to people. Whereas the Bitcoin network is accessible to all people. And if I've got some Bitcoin and you've got something that you want and fiat's collapsed, you'll accept Bitcoin for it and I'll be able to send it to you. And, and we're on our merry way as civilized people once again. That's, neither of us has gold, right? So like, I think, and it's very hard to distribute and spread gold and verify it and do all that kind of stuff. So Bitcoin can spread much more fluidly and easily because it lives on the internet and the internet is everywhere as well. So I've forgotten the question now. I'm sorry. This is what I warned about getting tired.
No, that was perfect. How are people acquiring Bitcoin in the future? It's if fiat doesn't exist or if it's very minimal and we don't have these fiat price signals, or is it earning it? And that like what does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think people work for it and people spend it. Like I'm really excited to spend my Bitcoin. I'm going to the conference in Vegas. I got asked to read my kids' book over there, and I love kids and I love talking to kids about Bitcoin, so I couldn't be more excited. But I'm sharing an Airbnb with some people. One person paid for the fiat, I guess. I sent him Bitcoin. That way he knew right away that I was good, like that he had my money. Right? I'm in Canada, by the way, so it's hard to send money to an American. Like I don't know, I don't have Venmo. We have a whole different thing here. So I bought tickets to the two side events using Bitcoin. It was just really easy. I preferred it. And I know that I'm putting Bitcoin in the hands of people who probably have less Bitcoin than I have, who want Bitcoin and who are trying to work for Bitcoin. Like what could make me happier than doing that? I'm not all caught up in, well, it'll go up. And sometimes I buy and replace, and I certainly did when I was earning an income in fiat because it gave me an excuse to dump fiat. But, like I'm very happy to live off of my Bitcoin. And I know a lot of Bitcoiners are enthusiastic and excited to do that because why wouldn't we be, right? So as soon as you let go of that fiat mindset of like, well, what's my Bitcoin worth in fiat dollars every single day? And you just say, have I got a good amount of Bitcoin? Do I want to spend it? Who do I want to spend it with and what on? It becomes easier to go through that calculus and just feel comfortable. And I think this is what, going to Bitcoin conferences, especially the Bitcoin only ones, where people go, where just about everyone will accept Bitcoin and just about everyone's carrying a wallet, you really start to realize what a peer-to-peer world is. It's not, you have to go to a big corporation and spend your money there with Visa, right? You don't have to, it's not Visa at Walmart for Visa at McDonald's. It's Satoshis with Canute, Satoshis with Derek, Satoshis and so you're exchanging peer-to-peer money with other people instantly and quickly, and they're giving you their goods or they're paying the bill for something else. And this is cash, right? And so it's really nice to be able to re-experience that, that way of life that we had before everything became electronic for money. And and human to human interaction. So I am definitely trailing on my energy as I keep forgetting your questions as I answer them. But that is
No, no,
that's what happens when talking for an hour and a half.
you were walking through these beautifully. Actually, what it makes me think of, what this is one of the other questions I'm going to ask you is, who loses and gains power in the situation? Because it seems like, we were talking about nation states earlier, that there's an
Yeah,
argument, you're like, we're nation states, where we, you talked about lines on a map. This is what made me think of it.
yeah,
Were we ever supposed to have nation states? We all grew up in our tribes and our
yeah,
families, and where did these arbitrary nation states come from? They didn't exist
yeah,
at one point. They probably won't exist in the future at some point either, right? So who gains this power when you and I
yeah,
can transact peer to peer across borders, these lines on a map, stuff like that? Who's
yeah.
gaining and who's assuming power here, and losing power?
Right. Well, we don't have enough time to go through the history of nations and why nations formed, and they were formed through people
Yeah,
killing each other, right? Like,
yeah.
and threatening to
Long
kill
story
each other
short,
and saying,
yeah,
this is my
yeah,
territory now, and I have a group of people who are going to eat the food that you grow, and I call them my army, and they're going to make sure that the other guy's army doesn't come in and steal your food, but I'm going to steal your food, right? But I'll steal less of it than the other guy, and so that this is how Western civilization grew. The American Revolution was an extraordinary moment in human history, and people don't quite appreciate at times, at least philosophically, how important it was to have a nation that actually didn't have a king, and that what the presidency wasn't meant to be a kingship role. Like people in America have forgotten that right now. They think they're electing the president, who
mm-hmm.
is the leader of the country, right? It is meant to be an executive function of approving laws or vetoing laws. That's what was designed in there. And the Bill of Rights was meant to be the supreme law of the land. The Constitution was meant to be the supreme law of the land, and that everybody answered to it, including the king, including the president, right? But this is, anyhow, without getting too much into that, I think power shifts to the people, right? Bitcoin is money for the people, by the people, of the people. And so the people are the ones who benefit, in particular, productive people gain wealth by producing and trading, right? Honest traders gain. And so what ends up losing is all of these, for lack of a better word, all of these evils in our civilization that we're struggling to get rid of, which is abuse of power, corruption, counterfeit, theft, fraud. And I'm not saying that we're going to live in a utopia where nobody tries to steal and nobody tries to lie, but in the realm of money, stealing and lying become a lot harder when all the money is verifiable and it's uninflatable and it's uncorruptible and it's unseizable, right? Like all of these, so many of the crimes, and like, why do the legislators today pursue criminals through the financial crimes that they commit rather than the actual crimes that they commit, right? They're trying to catch them for money laundering and tax evasion rather than for dealing drugs and murdering people, right? Like that, it's harder to prove that. It's easier to create all these rules around finance. But that, we've got this financial system that's really badly broken, as I've said before, and and it steals from everybody, right? And so that kind of theft that's built into the system, which allegedly is there to protect us from thieves, so you need to be stolen from in order to not be stolen from. That's what starts to diminish and disappear. And as we get less and less of that, the wealth accrues, and wealth not just in terms of goodies, but in time and in distraction from, like in not distraction from, in not being worried in the first place, right? Like how many times are you losing sleep, or are other people losing sleep over worry about whether their money is going to last them, or whether they have enough money to meet the next paycheck, or they're going to outlive their money for older people who've been saving? These worries, I think, go away and are replaced with a sense of peace and comfort. So it's a different type of peace, right? And we're not all living through wars of bombs dropping, but we're living through psychological warfare all the time, and that's that's something that I think we're going to be able to be freed from at a much larger scale as Bitcoin becomes more and more prevalent. But it's like everybody makes the choice for themselves. The choice will become a lot easier, right? Right now, it looks like a tough choice to make. In the future, when everybody's doing it, it'll look like a really easy choice. But it's still a choice you got to make, right? And so, as fiat shrinks and shrinks, it'll look as silly as not having a phone or not having the internet, right? But initially when the phones came out, it was like, that's a pretty weird thing you've got there with a BlackBerry attached to your hip with a typewriter. Like, Are you a pager? Are you a drug dealer? What's going on, right? Why do you need this thing attached to your hip to send emails? It doesn't make sense. How important is email? And now nobody can live without a phone for 10 seconds.
So true. Is it fair to say? So we've been talking a lot about this. This, I don't know, we'll call it exchange rate, I guess, but just this world, living in these two worlds, and we talked a little bit about does Bitcoin have a fair distribution? Is it are people late to the game here? Can acquiring a million sats, 10 million sats, or zero point 0.1
Yeah.
Bitcoin, is that feasible for people to, hey, I'm living a very good life eventually, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like we said, saving in Bitcoin. And we talked about earlier, like the rising tide lifting all boats. And this, because this thing we hear about a lot, like I'm too late. I see it a lot in my YouTube comments. I mean,
Well,
I
let
see it
me
in
give
these
you this
videos.
parallel.
Yeah.
Those people who moved to America before it was the United States of America, even those blue bloods who came on the ships and celebrated the first Thanksgiving, like they didn't get, so they were early and they got a whole bunch of land. They had to make the land themselves, right? Like there wasn't an arrival welcome with a border patrol and guides to say, here's where you go. And there was no Walmart and there was no McDonald's. Like there was nothing for them, right? They had to build it from scratch. They had to work at it, and they made the nation better and better and better. And people who come to America today, still for the most part, all over the world, they're trying to get here, right? They're trying to get to America, and they're not like, oh, it's no fair. You got here earlier than I did. Like they want to get there. They want to come there, and they end up being, many of them being like the hardest working, smartest, most committed individuals to come to America, and those who cherish and appreciate the gift of what America offers even more than people who were born here or were early here. So I think the same phenomenon is true of Bitcoin, right? Like those of us who had to go through the hardships, who had to fight the block size war, who had to not lose their money by giving it to some exchange that ended up disappearing with it. Those of us who made it, right? And many people died along the way, just as many pioneers and pilgrims died along the way. Those people who lost their fortunes along the way had to go through it. So this question of, is it fair? It's like, I had a university professor who said anyone who finishes university and thinks the world is fair has a learning disability. Like the term fair is a loaded term, right? Like you can come to Bitcoin now and it's hard. You have to put your money where your mouth is. There's lots of skeptics. You have to take precautions. You all kinds of precautions. Don't lose your key. Don't disclose your key. Like there's all sorts of things that are going to get so much easier and so much simpler and so much more accessible that people once look and say, how did people use anything but Bitcoin? It's obvious now, right? Just as it's obvious now to use the internet, and it's obvious that America is a great country, but it wasn't that case when there was no infrastructure and it had to be built. So that's the moment that we're living in right now. It's early and it's not for everybody. It's for people who have the wherewithal, the passion, the commitment to go into this thing when it's at the stage that it's at, and it gets better all the time because more and more people are coming to it and making it better. But it's not. They say Bitcoin is for everyone, but is for anyone, but it's not for everyone yet. And there's a subtlety because all these words have equivocal meanings, but everyone can use it, but not everyone wants to use it in the state that it's in right now. And so that's fine. They'll come when they're ready and they'll come to a different world, but they won't have a right to complain and say, it's no fair. You were here when I wasn't prepared to be here myself. Right. So that's, if you want a term of fairness, it's like, it's fair game. Anyone can come and play Bitcoin whenever they want to, but a lot of people don't want to play yet, and that's understandable.
What does so and then so the fair distribution, that's one part, but then the being late is the kind of the other part of that, and they're like two sides of the same coin in a way. But it's how do people that have been in Bitcoin for a while, and then say it's 5 years now, say someone's coming into Bitcoin, they're earning all of a sudden, we're in a hyper Bitcoinized world and we're earning it. And they're like, well, you guys got in early. Like it's too late for me. But and someone, it might be even 10 years after that. People are, because I see this a lot in the YouTube comments as well, where, I'm talking to people and they're like, well, it's too late. We're going to find something else. I'm too late to the game, whatever. But the question being, how does Bitcoin start changing the world to, even if you're not in Bitcoin, but you come in 10 years from now, how has Bitcoin made the world a better place where even if you're last in, kind of like what you're alluding to with America, you still benefit from it. But again, it's harder to see because it's not some physical place that.
Well, but I do think that's it. I think people start to say, just as people everywhere in the world, even outside of America, would rather get paid in American dollars than their local currency, right? They view that as an advantage. People will be saying that about Bitcoin, even if when they've missed it. They're like, I wasn't here when you could mine Bitcoin on a laptop. I wasn't here when you could mine Bitcoin on a laptop, right? And so I came in later, and I wasn't upset at the people who could mine Bitcoin on a laptop. I lost a lot of money trying to mine Bitcoin when it was moving to ASICs, and it was a disaster. And so I learned a lesson. But I didn't say it's not fair. Like, the system is so transparent; it's very hard to say that Bitcoin isn't fair. You might say it's no fair, like from a fragile ego perspective, it's no fair that nobody told me about it, right? Like, I could say the same thing. And when I first heard about Bitcoin, I got into it right away, but nobody told me about it until 2013. Well, it's nobody's responsibility to tell me about it, and it's not my fault for not having found out about it. You have to accept, what goes on. You're not omniscient. Nobody owes you a duty to tell you exactly what's going to be great in the future. Everyone's trying to tell you what's going to be great in the future, but most of them are wrong, right? So you ultimately have to decide for yourself. But it's not that people who are late to the game are disadvantaged in such a way that it's not worth playing the game. It's like, there's sound money that you can use and increase your purchase and be able to save in reliably, and it'll increase in purchasing power, and it's reliable and untheftable, and you don't have to distract yourself with becoming an investor or hiring someone to invest your money for you. So, like, you get all these benefits no matter how late you come to the game. And I think that's what's going to attract people to come to the game at every stage of the game, whether they're early or late.
All right, my last one is like a two-parter. It's price prediction, but it's not. It's with a twist. It's the Samson Omega candle. I just interviewed Samson, a month ago or whatever, and I was asking him. Obviously everyone in the Bitcoin world knows him for his, it's going to $1 million this year in fiat terms, right? So my question to you is, when do we see the Omega candle? Is it before we get to $1 million, like we've been talking about here today, or is it after we get past $1 million?
The Omega candle is what, 10,000 a day?
100,000 a day. 100,000 a day.
100,000 in a day. Yep. I think that's a long ways away. That's either like some hyperinflationary event took place, or Bitcoin's well over $1 million. Because that's a 10% move on $1 million Bitcoin in a single day. So it's possible we get one. And there's no disrespect to Samson. I love seeing the smug confidence on his face when he makes these predictions. But I think we have a long way to go, because the people who control the capital that's denominated in fiat are rightfully conservative, right? Look, it's one thing when I got nothing else to lose, I'm going to go all in on Bitcoin as a single individual, right? When you've got a board of directors and 100,000 constituents, or like a few million, like you're the California pension plan, right? The CalPERS. You've got 10 million beneficiaries that you have to watch out for. You can't just say, I've decided to go all in on Bitcoin, even if you believe it, right? Like, it's not going to be a reality. So there's a long time before significant amounts of capital, such that they move the price of Bitcoin by what's 100,000? Well, by $2 trillion a day, right? Like that. Yeah. There's 20 million outstanding Bitcoin, and if you move it by 100,000, you're like, so for the value of Bitcoin to move by $2 trillion within a 24-hour period means that there's many trillions of dollars flowing into it, weekly at least. And we're still a ways away from that. I mean, I think it's so interesting regardless of what you think of the strategy or the individual, seeing Michael Saylor buy up as much of this land as he possibly can, because he knows everybody's going to want to move there, is very opportunistic. And being able to use financial engineering from the previous world to do it is very interesting. Mm-hmm. How it all plays out in the end, what the final outcome is, what the final chapter on the MicroStrategy or the strategy story is, I can't tell you, right? But it's been fascinating to watch, and he's done a great job of educating lots of people to the point where, at least as individuals, they were ready to go all in on Bitcoin, or largely in on Bitcoin, or in on Bitcoin and strategy. And so I think he's opened up a world for a lot of people, and he has accelerated the adoption. But there's also reasons to be concerned about, one entity holding a lot of it with a third-party custodian, and and what exactly that means, who's going to end up owning it and who isn't going to end up owning it. But again, to anyone who's listening, it's like, you can own what Bitcoin you can own, and you ought to own what Bitcoin you can own. So don't get too caught up in the stories of, you're worried about this, you're worried about that. There's a long-term play for your own benefit to enter the new world and not get left behind or come later than you come at a point where you're late enough that you regret not having come in sooner when you could have come in sooner.
Well said. What? All right. Last one is, what is hyper Bitcoinization to you? And for me, it is when I am and I have joke, but I'm half serious. Is, former hockey guy turned real estate, entrepreneur for 10 years. And it's when I can buy an apartment complex, have my Bitcoin,
Yeah.
pay for it in Bitcoin, and then my tenants or my residents are paying me back in Bitcoin. That to me is kind of
Yeah.
my generic, like, I'll know we're in hyper Bitcoinization at that point. What is
Yeah.
it for you?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the term was originally coined to suggest a period in time where the Bitcoinization of the economy happens very quickly, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
overnight, you wake up in the morning, you find out China has bought all the Bitcoin that they possibly could. The prices, you've had the Omega candle, and everyone's mandated to use Bitcoin in China, and now it's about to happen today in America, right? So I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to have a much more gradual event, but like full Bitcoin, like Bitcoinization is going to be this gradual thing, and I hope I live to see it, which gives you my sense of time horizon around it, where in general, just about everywhere I go, I can pay in Bitcoin, and just about everywhere someone's got to give me money, they've got Bitcoin to give me. Right. But I think that's a really long way off. Like I've been pushed now, and I may be mistaken, because, these exponential things look like they're happening very slowly in the first cases, right? Like you've got some exponential technology, and in its first year, it's got 1/100th of 1% of the market. And so everybody who's in the market looks at it and says, well, that was an interesting idea. Maybe I'll pay attention to it. And then a couple of years pass, and it's like 1/10 of 1% of the market. And people say, you see, it didn't catch on. And then it gets to 1% of the market, and people say, well, after all this time, it's still only 1%. 1% is not very much. Our company alone has a 30% share of the market. Right. And then a number of years pass, and now it's accelerating, right? Or it's still going on this at the same exponential rate, but now it's at 10%. And at 10%, people start to wake up and they say, well, we're still at 30%, but there's forecasts now that say it's going to get to 30%. And we need to be worried. Now we're going to take it seriously and get involved in it. But it's already too late, because the momentum is unstoppable. And some of them will try to stop it, and some of it will try to get into it, but only half-heartedly. And then it becomes 100%. Right? Or 50%, whatever its plateau is. And everybody's like, boy, we didn't see that coming. Right? Like, how did that happen? But it happened very gradually. And the same thing with the internet, right? When the internet was dial up, there was a lot of hype, and people said it's going to be the information superhighway, and people said it's slow. And I had the experience of, I've said it a few times, working in a newspaper company, and people joke, you can't take the internet into the bathroom with you like you can with a newspaper. It's slow. Who's going to write the articles if there's no journalists? Like, all these questions that the free market ended up answering. But for years, for at least a decade, people were saying it's not a threat. I'm not worried about it. I can stop these companies. I've got a printing press. They don't. Right. And so these changes are happening. And I think when you look at Bitcoin, and as you pointed out, like that for you, this big insight was looking at the price on a log chart. And when you look at it on a log chart, it's a very smooth, it's a very smooth expansion. Well, that's the point 0.01, 0.11, 10, 100 chart, right? That's what the log scale is. And that's what we're on. So I don't know, maybe we are only 10 years away from that level of Bitcoinization that you describe. I feel like it's more, but maybe that's just because I've spent the first 10 years of my Bitcoin experience on the 0.01, 0.11 chart, and the next 10 years gets us to 100. It doesn't feel that way to me, but humans are really, really bad at exponentials. So all we can do is say we're really bad at this.
Yeah, it's gonna be amazing to see it play out. That's for sure.
Yeah.
In general, generational wealth, which I didn't touch on earlier, the video is it's my favorite Bitcoin video. I've probably watched it 100
Thank
times. So I have 100 of the hundreds of thousands of views that it has. So I'm going to
you.
link to all these. I've talked to you
Yeah,
about the music in there, stuff like that, which, I'll
yeah.
later on, we'll talk about that more, but Why Bitcoin, the book, I'll link to that. The kids book, which I read to the kids, my
Oh,
four
that's
kids,
great. Yeah.
with the,
I've got a
simplifying.
copy of it here. I just, it's
Yeah.
called
Oh,
Satoshi Nakamoto and his Bitcoin Inventions. Available on the Shamory site.
yes.
It's, and I'm so excited to be reading it to kids at the Bitcoin conference. I read it in Madeira to the kids, and it was really moving. Like I tested the book reading it on Zoom to kids when I'd first written it, but to actually be in person with kids reading the book was just really splendid. And now for the first, I didn't even have the finished book with the animation or the illustrations in it. Now I do, so I think it's going to be really, really exciting. And I'm plugging away at that. I don't make any money off of it, just so that people know. But like, it's a passion project, right?
Amazing.
One of these
Absolutely
things you
amazing.
can
You're a
give
phenomenal writer.
when you don't have to chase
Yeah.
fiat.
Yeah, it's so cool, and we're all grateful for that, for sure. Well, your brain is spent in the future thinking about many of these things. There's no one better to talk about this stuff than you, Tomer.
I'm really working on letting go of the remaining fiat remnants of my personality and psyche. Like that is, I want to say, like, I'm working on a script for another film. I am working on an article and speech about Nostr and its impact. I'm working on something in the education field. So I've got specific projects, but the thing that really gets me out of bed or gets me into bed, because it sometimes involves meditation and lying in bed for times, is that spiritual journey of awakening and seeing what is the experience like in this Bitcoin realm, freed from the fiat worries, freed from the fiat lies and games. Uh, it doesn't automatically come to you what you ought to do. You know what you no longer have to do. You know what you're not worried about anymore, but it doesn't automatically spark everything else inside of you. And I'm excited to go to conferences with people and spend time with other Bitcoiners, because I do find that really inspirational, and lots of ideas come up and you see what other people are working on and something snags and hits for you. And for me, for the longest time, I really wanted to work in Bitcoin. And I finally had that dream come true when the fiat world rejected me during COVID, and I couldn't find another job. So I started working on Bitcoin because I couldn't find anything else to do, and wonderful things started to happen to me. So um, I, I'm I don't know exactly where I am on my journey, if I'm halfway through or if I'm 98% of the way through or only 1% through, but the spiritual excitement, and this is where maybe I'd say the other movie that I have besides Bitcoin's Generational Wealth that I think is worthwhile for people to spend a bit of time on is called The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto. And it's not about fiat wealth.
It's a
It's
great
not
one.
about
Yeah.
what Satoshi's million coins are worth in fiat terms. It's about a much deeper ideal, and how Bitcoin changes you, why it changes you, and what it means. And so that to me is like, if there's one message that I really feel I've been given to share with the world, it's Bitcoin lets you discover the pure, true, unadulterated you. And that's an incredible treasure that is going to be more valuable to you than any other treasure in the world. And the Bitcoin journey is is the path that I see for many people getting there. That's not to eschew religion or other spiritual practices at all. It's perfectly aligned with any kind of spiritual practice, because it's freeing you from things that take down your spirit and things that say that your spirit is less than what it is. But that movie tells the whole story, and there's a 38-minute version of it on YouTube if you search for The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto. Happy if you share it in the show notes too. But that, if
Absolutely.
there's one big message I have to give to the world, it's the lesson of that particular essay.
Yeah, I will link to all that. You really touched on a chord that we'll have to talk about in Vegas, but it's laying, just laying in bed. I find myself doing that. I'm a thinker as well, but I have such a juxtaposition where my mind battles of I want to sit and think and ponder and write things, but then I have that, like, I don't know, alpha competitor side where it's like, you're not doing enough, Brandon. And I know I have a calling to give back, but at times I'm like, why am I doing podcasts? Why am I writing things? Why am I doing this? Why am I not just being present and doing things with my kids all day? I'm blessed to be in a
Yeah.
position where I could go do things like that, but it's like, why am I here doing this? Why am I talking to Tomer? I love doing it, but why am I spending my time doing it? So it's a constant battle I have in my head and have had for a long, long time. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that struck a chord with me, because it's like laying in
Well,
bed, I
yeah, I
feel
think
guilty. Even meditating,
yeah,
sitting, spending time doing, I feel guilty not going and
right.
doing
Well, you
something.
should. Yeah, you shouldn't, right? You shouldn't. Like, I think there's a expression I heard. I think Ayn Rand quoted it often. She said, "There's a thing called unearned guilt, which is when you're feeling guilty for not like it's right to feel guilty when you've done something bad, right? And you should feel guilty about it. Like that's a natural reaction. But there's all this unearned
Mm-hmm.
guilt that gets projected onto you by society that hasn't earned your time, that hasn't earned your energy, but claims to have a right to it, and therefore makes you feel guilty for not dedicating all. You're not prepared to pay 56% income tax now. Like what kind of selfish person are you? And you
Wild.
see it all over the place.
Yeah.
I have an acquaintance on Facebook. I hesitate to call him a friend any longer. Who's like, someone commented that they wanted to vote for a certain party because they'd get to keep more of their own money, and he said that just goes to show what kind of a person you are, right? And the judgment, like, I don't. Why is somebody else entitled to my money? But anyhow, that becomes a separate philosophical discussion. But the unearned guilt is something you have to let go of so that you can experience what it's like to be you, not a prisoner of somebody else, told that you have to give up your time and your energy to them because they claim a need of your time and energy. They claim some right to it. Like, it's you. So claim your own life, claim your own self, figure out what that means, because you don't come with an instruction manual. It doesn't say Brandon's purpose on this earth is this. And you say, oh, okay, I'm just going to do that thing. You have to discover it for yourself. And it's a very wide area that you can explore. And it's kind of hard to know at times. Sometimes you go down dead end, things that seem amazing, but they turn out to be dead ends. And it's like, oh, I wasn't that interested in that thing. It was a curiosity, but not a passion, which is nothing to, you may find Steve Jobs has an excellent story in his commencement speech at Stanford, where he says, he dropped out of university, but he audited a bunch of courses. And one of the courses he audited was typography or stenography or something, calligraphy,
Mm-hmm.
how letters fit together. And that, when it came time to create the Macintosh, he had all the underlying knowledge of how different typefaces and fonts work. So he was able to create not just a single monospace type font, which is the only thing that was available in the personal computer world, but all these beautiful fonts that we now all come to take for granted in computers. It's because he audited those courses. So even sometimes when you go down a path of an interest that doesn't look like it'll be terribly relevant, you find that you can integrate that knowledge into something else later in life, and it served a purpose. So it's okay to go down the narrow paths that are short paths. They don't have to be the path for life, because you pick up knowledge, and then you carry all this stuff around inside your head, and you never know when the integration point comes together and you just find something that makes a lot of sense for you personally.
It's it's so funny we're ending on this, because that's the thing I've been thinking about, meditating on, praying about, just all this. And looking back on my life, playing, all the way to professional hockey, played in Toronto a lot growing up, and then being in real estate, doing all these things, which has led to what I know is my calling, is to educate people on what you and I are doing and Bitcoiners are doing all the time. And I know when I look back, it's very obvious, all those skills and all the things that were inside of me. I used to think it was politics 20 years ago, but it led to now of, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. But I still battle with the, hey, I'm going to think, or, I'm going to relax or meditate on these things. And then I still have that, like, I need to be doing more. We could be serving more, we could be educating even more. Why am I, meditating or relaxing? So it's like this,
Well, and listen, this is, I mean, this is where sometimes the guilt may be a right feeling. It's like, maybe you are being lazy, but you have to know the answer has to be truthful to you, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it shouldn't come from some sense of guilt. Like, I always have to feel, if I'm not feeling guilty, that means I'm being lazy, right? If it like, guilt is not a natural emotion. Guilt is an emotion that says you need to correct your action, right? So, and maybe you do need to correct your action, but if you're assessing your life and you're doing everything that's right, and you're still feeling a sense of guilt, it may be that it's this unearned guilt, and you need to stand up and look in the mirror and say, stop it already. Like, you've done nothing wrong. You've done nothing to deserve this particular guilt. Don't give it life. Don't give that guilt life. Live guiltlessly about this aspect of your life. And many of us should, because I think evil takes advantage of the productive people through unearned guilt, right? Through saying, you need to give me what you have. I've produced nothing. You've produced something. it's not fair. You have something, I have
Yeah.
nothing. Give me something that you have. And that's the unearned guilt that evil is using to take advantage of you. So you need to reject evil by having a strong moral fiber around what is valid and what is not. And you are entitled, like you have the right to your life. Right? And that's not just a right to not be murdered. That's a right to live your life to the fullest according to your choices of what you want to do, provided you're not infringing on other people's right to life. You're not living off of their unearned guilt.
Yeah, it's beautiful stuff. Thank you so much, Tomer Strolight, for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
If you can't get enough of these interviews and you want to deepen your education on sound money, wealth building, and freedom, you're not going to want to miss this playlist here. Happy binging. Check it out now. We'll see you inside.